All right. It was 1964. I was 5 years old. My dad comes out and he says, "Get in the car. We're going to Battle Creek." So me, 9 of my siblings, my mom and my dad, we pile into the station wagon. It was before seatbelts. And we head to Battle Creek. I don't know what Battle Creek was. All I knew is Battle Creek was where we'd cut out the box tops for the cornflakes and send it in for a prize. But we're heading out, and I'm talking to my brothers as we're all packed in there, and one of them says, "We're going to see our grandfather." That made no sense, because our grandfather lived with us. My mom's dad, he lived with us. We called him Jaja, which is Polish for grandpa. And Jaja lived with us from before I was born till he passed away when I was 14 years old. And we all loved Jaja. Nothing but good memories with him. He didn't speak much English. Us kids didn't speak much Polish, but we loved him. But they said, "No, we're going to visit our other Jaja, my dad's dad. And we're going to Battle Creek because he lived there at the VA hospital, the Veterans Administration's long-term care facility, because of injuries he'd suffered in the war. And the war was World War I. But the World War, when they fought that, they didn't know enough to start numbering our world wars. They called, it was sometimes called the war to end all wars. In this time of the year, I often think of both of my grandparents because, just a few weeks ago, we recognized that national holiday, Veterans Day. But when I was a kid, they didn't call it that. They called it Remembrance Day. We'd all wear like red poppies. It was a much more somber holiday, remembering all these people who had lost their lives. 20 million people dead, including 100,000 Americans. Hundreds of millions of people bombed and forced out of their homes. And, it changed the course of so much of this world. And many of those veterans, then went home to dozens of countries, bringing with them that virus that then killed another 50 million people. In our family, too, our history was changed because our grandfather, Jaja, my mom's dad, was living in occupied Poland, and the occupying army was coming around rounding up young men to press into the army. And his dad, my great-grandfather, wasn't having it. He hid him. They sold what possessions they could, including their one milking cow. They lived, they were a peasant family in Małopolska, and they sold it, and they got him a ticket in steerage, third class, to America, never to see his family or home country again. Unfortunately, my other grandfather, the one we were going to visit, had arrived in America 10 years before. So he was drafted into the American Army, went to France, came back, his body in one piece, but suffering from the brain injuries that they then called shell shock. It was losing his grasp on reality, and till eventually, by 1932, because he was a danger to himself and others, my grandmother had him committed, and he spent the next decade after decade after decade in the VA hospital. So there we were out on the lawn, and all of us were lined up doing what kids did back then, shut up, be seen and not heard, and we're watching my dad and my grandfather talk to each other in Polish, and I'm just staring up at him. My grandfather, he has this faraway, shaky look in his eye, and he's chain smoking one after another these Camel non-filter cigarettes. And I'm about this tall, so I'm staring at his hands. It was fascinating. They're just shaking, and his hands are brown and wrinkled, except all his fingertips are yellowed from all those cigarettes from all those years. And I'm just staring at it, and he looks down at me, pats me on the head, and musses my hair, and then pulls out his pack of cigarettes and shakes one out to offer it to me. So my dad, says something to him in Polish. He puts the cigarettes away. And I'm looking up at him, and in my 5-year-old logic, I just see his sad. It's just so sad, and I'm looking at his shaky hand, and I'm thinking, if only his parents had had a cow that they could have sold, so he didn't have to fight in that war.